Greetings. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar on transforming systems practice through critical self-reflection through sciences of mind and perception. My name is Shakti Saran, and I'm the founder of a think tank called Shaktify. Shaktify's vision is to embrace a culture of oneness and to live in harmony with Mother Nature. And our mission is to empower change makers. I'd like to welcome our audience today, and I'm pleased to say that we have had over 300 registrations from 42 countries, from as far as Canada to Australia. I'd like to welcome our guest speakers today, Professor Gerald Midgley and Dr. Rachel Lilley. My introduction to both of them took place at a Cornell University International Systems Thinking Conference back in 2023, where both delivered a keynote address on DSRP in relation to the plurality of systems approaches. And for those of you who are not familiar with DSRP, it's intended to be a unified approach to systems thinking. However, to my amazement, they were talking a language that no one else in academia or outside academia that I knew of, was talking. They were exploring the connections of systems theory and critical self-reflection practices. I was soon in correspondence with them, and believe me, after a 15-month pursuit, I'm really pleased to be in conversation with them today. Thank you, Gerald and Rachel, for accepting my invitation. I'm really honored to do this webinar with you today. For those of you who are not familiar with Gerald and Rachel, here is a snapshot introduction. Professor Gerald Midgley is Emeritus Professor in the Center of Systems Studies at the University of Hull and is also a visiting professor at the University of Birmingham. He is a renowned expert in systems thinking and has authored and edited almost a dozen books and has also published over 400 academic papers. His notable book includes Systemic Intervention, Philosophy, Methodology and Practice, and Community Operation Research. Dr. Rachel Lilley is an associate professor in the Birmingham Leadership Institute at the University of Birmingham, where she has developed and now directs an innovative master's degree program in systems thinking and leadership. She has previously served as a yoga and a mindfulness teacher and has sought to integrate systems thinking and leadership with reflective practices and embodied approaches, all with the aim of supporting practitioners to manage complexity and facilitate systemic change. She has authored over 24 academic papers. Gerald and Rachel have got an ongoing collaboration. They have recently teamed up to explore the implications of contemporary neuroscience and cognitive psychology for systemic leadership and systems thinking. This research, mind you, is at the cutting edge of a new wave of systemic inquiry that marries together the inner and outer dimensions of our work that is required to address some of the most challenging local to global issues of our time. The objective of this webinar is really to critically examine the role of self-reflection and sense-making in the application of systems thinking. And this webinar seeks to uncover the part or the role that self-reflection can play in systems thinking, to identify what is missing in current systems practice, and to understand what it would take to make systems thinking more accessible and transformative. So the plan for today's session is that I will be in conversation with both Gerald and Rachel for about approximately 45 minutes. This will be followed by audience Q&A of about 20 minutes, and then we end up with a wrap-up and a close. In the 45 minutes that I have with Rachel and Gerald, I'm going to start with a personal question to each of them as it relates to their personal journey. It's an icebreaker question just to get to know our speakers, some aspect of their lives and what's brought them here today. Then we'll get on to three thematic areas that, that we're going to cover in today's session. The first is the evolution of systems science, how systems science and systems theory has evolved over the last century. Then we'll talk about advancements in neuroscience and the imperative of self-knowledge that is prevailing today. And then the last section that we get into will be on the future of systems practice. Gerald and Rachel, how are you today?
Yeah, good. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you
Yeah,
for
no,
being
same.
here.
It's amazing seeing the amount of people and from all over the world who are here. A few of them who are familiar, which is wonderful. I think I noticed at least one student, which was amazing. It would be wonderful if we're all in the same room, because I'm sure they will bring an amazing amount of knowledge themselves, so and experience. So yeah, thank you for the invitation, Shakti.
Wonderful to have both of you on this webinar today. So Gerald, let me start with you. You've had a really impressive and an accomplished career that spans like over 40 years. And you have, researched, you have taught, you have looked at every dimension of systems thinking, even practice systems thinking. What is it about systems thinking that made you make a life revolving around it?
Well, I think there's two short stories I can tell. The first
Please.
one when I was an undergraduate student in psychology, and that I was just appalled by the disciplinary boundaries that were set without any reflection. So, sitting in a semester's lectures on psychopathy, for example, we did loads of stuff on brain chemistry, and then 10 minutes from the end of the very last lecture, this lecturer just said, "Oh, there's an equal amount of material about how psychopathy is socially constructed, not just a brain chemistry thing, but you don't want to know about that, do you?" And all those students said no. And I was just shocked, jaw dropping. And so when I discovered systems science initially rather than systems thinking, it kind of answered that. It said we transcend disciplinary boundaries and we just think about defining and redefining systems. And the other experience is kind of linked to that. Running my own business as an evaluator and realizing that the traditional scientific methods I've been taught just get you to look at what is the case. But actually, what people are interested in is how they change things. And when you change things, that means you can't just stay with what is the case. You actually have to think what different people think should be happening, which meant that I had to completely rethink everything I'd been doing, basically. So discovering systems thinking helped me with that.
Thank you. I'm sure there has been a very, profound dimension of your life, and systems thinking, and has played such a really important role in your journey. Thank you for sharing that, Gerald. Rachel, I have a question for you. You had also a very impressive career, but a very diverse career. You've had stints as a yoga instructor, as a mindfulness teacher. You've been a campaigner. You've been a behavior change expert, a systems thinking practitioner, and now you run this, master's program at the University of Birmingham. So there have been so many changes in your journey and your own personal evolution. Is there anything that has stuck with you throughout, and what would that be? Could you share that with us, please?
It's interesting, isn't it, Shakti? Because you speak of Gerald in a way being like that systems thinking has been this whole journey, and that my journey's been quite diverse, and I want to say kind of all over the place. So it looks like, but to my mind, my journey from very early on was a systems thinking journey. I came from a family where I experienced high trauma. I experienced poverty, homelessness, and family breakdown. And what I experienced, and I think a lot of people that I've met in similar situations, is you have to try and understand the system that is doing this, basically. And as you get into teenage years and into education, I did a communication studies A level, and that covered Shannon and Weaver. So I was already into cybernetics. I started to see my experience as more systemic, and then kind of followed my nose. I started off as a journalist, actually, and then worked in, as you say, social change to start with, speaking directly back to my experience. But even then, it was like, well, how do we change systems? In the day, it was all about campaigning, information deficit. If people understand the information, they will change the system. We don't, and that doesn't work. And then when I started working in climate change as part of that journey and working collaboratively and co-ops, what you could see is that really required whole systems change. And so I was exposed to systems change kind of thinking, Fritjof Capra's thinking. And at that point, it was very much, for me, I was recognizing that the human, the self, was massively implicated in all of this and wasn't really being addressed. I became a yoga teacher by accident because I didn't have a yoga teacher where I moved to in Wales. So that set me off on that journey. And it's been that kind of parallel journeys of working on social environmental change, then behavior change, systems change, how all that comes together, alongside my own parallel journey that then has landed me where I am now.
All right, wonderful. So systems thinking has helped you. It's also helped you, kind of heal yourself in this journey. It's helped you in your career. It's helped you in solving some of the, throwing insights into some of the really wicked challenges that we're confronted with as a humanity. Yeah, so that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you both. That's a great start to this webinar to get to know where you're coming from. Yeah, excellent. So we're going to move into the first session of our first thematic section of this webinar, which is on the evolution of system science. So what we're trying to unearth is that how has system science evolved, over the last century or so, and what is current systems theory, and also the future of systems theory. What's it going to look like? So let me start with you, Gerald, and pose a question to you. So we all know that system sciences has evolved considerably from the initial emphasis on hard systems thinking. In what ways has system science evolved?
Okay. So I don't want to give you a boring history lesson on this. And there are always exceptions. So for each kind of wave of systems thinking, there have been perspectives that sit outside the norm. But if you can think of things in terms of three broad waves that have changed, that have happened across a century, you started out in terms of systems thinking rather than the science behind it, with quite an expert orientated practice where people were seeing systems as in the real world, and it was quite a quantitative practice, and people talked about systems engineering and systems analysis, these kinds of things. It came into a crisis in the 1970s when people invested millions in trying to build supercomputer models of every possible interacting problem. And it's just not possible. People spent years developing these models, then they invited decision makers into the room, and surprise, surprise, the decision makers had different questions that couldn't be answered by the models. So it went through a complete change where people began to say, actually, this needs to be about facilitating dialogue between different perspectives. It means that the system is not necessarily in the world, it's in people's perspectives. So there are different perspectives on what systems are, rather than assuming that they're just real and fixed. And that also came into problems around the 1980s, 1990s, when people began to see that simply inviting people into the room to share their perspectives didn't deal with power relationships. So, debate and dialogue is often closed if there's power relationships that are not addressed. So we came to a position when I first started in there. I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time, really. And people started to change things. They said, let's draw upon the best of all of this practice that's been developed so we can have methodological pluralism. And at the same time, let's be less naive about power relationships. Let's explore power relationships so that we understand the situation better before we actually design our projects. And that's kind of where we've been at really for the last couple of decades. What I'm seeing now, and I won't go into detail because that's where this whole session is really understanding this more about the relational self and how we construct our understandings of the world, how we construct our assumptions based on our past experience. And that changes things quite fundamentally, I think, because you actually have to realize that as a practitioner, you have to open yourself up to dialogue in a different way, and you have to open up your understanding of your own embodied experience, which is why I ended up working with Rachel, because she was, had an understanding of what that meant in practice that I didn't. So.
All right, thank you. You spoke just now about methodological pluralism. So, for the benefit of our audience, can you please enlighten us on what do you see as the key difference between systems methods? And, we've had an array of methods over the last several decades. So what do you see as the key difference between systems methods and systems practice?
Okay, so a method for me is a set of tools that scaffold people's experience as they enter dialogue. It helps them pay attention to different things, and so the systems theory around that, about what they need to pay attention to. The practice, though, is much more about exploring the situation systemically. You can really use methods unsystemically. I've seen people take a particular method and think because they're using the method, they're actually being systemic. But being systemic is about really exploring and understanding the situation and understanding more of your own assumptions, how you're creating your the world through your expectations of it. And those expectations are based on your past experience. If you don't have any appreciation of that, then you're going to make all sorts of unfounded assumptions, and you can actually do more harm than good with those methods. So that's how I see the difference. The practice is much more exploratory, both in terms of the inner work and the outer work. The methods are there to scaffold people's work through that process.
That's a great insight. Thank you. So you're speaking about assessing and reassessing one's assumptions in practice. So are you saying that, are you suggesting that systems practice has not kept up with the advancements in system science? Is there is one ahead of the other?
So I could just go into a whole bunch of different systems theories, and I don't know if that's going to be very useful. I would maybe turn the question around a bit, because in some ways it's systems science that hasn't kept up in the most part with the idea that there's always a perspective in systems. And once you realize that that perspective is embodied and that it's created by systems, so we are the embodiment of the systems that we're within and we relate with. So there are systems theories about that, but a lot of the general systems theory is still talking about the world of systems without appreciating the role of perspective within that. Whereas systems thinking, I think, has got to grips with that much more. So I think there's a useful relationship there, but it really has to be two ways. You can't just say, like I've heard some people do, there's the fundamental science and then there's the practice we base on it. It's a two-way relationship.
Great. Thank you for that clarity. A question for you, Rachel. And you worked with, many systems theorists. You're quite familiar with systems thinking itself. You also worked with systems practitioners. In your experience, what are some of the drawbacks in the application of conventional systems methods and tools? And can you, give us one or two illustrations?
Yeah, thanks for that, Shakti. Well, I guess that follows on from what Gerald was saying, and this point about perspective, and in systems thinking, how there became an understanding of a perspective, both a perspective of the system, which is also part of the system. And I thought it was kind of interesting, Shakti, that what you heard when I spoke earlier was you termed healing, which isn't exactly what I would experience. What I would have said is that's not my experience. I wouldn't have described it as such. So that's interesting in itself, how our perspectives are seeing something quite different, related but different. And actually, there's a question in the question already about healing and being healed. But I don't see things in those terms because as Gerald said, I'm a perspective that is embedded in a system. And so understanding myself as emergent from that system is enormously helpful in helping me do maybe something that you might hear as healing, but also it helps me act and work within the system to potentially change that system. And I guess that's where we're getting into the self-reflective piece. And and the thing that systems thinking has taken a long time to catch up on, ironically, given that it also informs systems therapy, where actually, if you look, there's a lot of work in this. It kind of that branched off and hasn't really been referred to. But ironically, understanding the complexity of what a perspective, what a human perception system really is. There's talk of mental models. That's just used very broadly, but it's far too simplistic. There's actually been quite a good blog by Benjamin Taylor, isn't there, about criticizing mental models, because when you start to look at it, it completely oversimplifies how the brain works to the extent that it just doesn't really speak to the realities of how the mind works. And meanwhile, we've had massive advancement in terms of understanding the incredible complexity of the embodied mind and how it works. And that's been going on for the last 40 odd years, certainly since the invention of the fMRI scanners. That really moved things on as well. And, emotion science was really slow to develop. So that's moved on massively. So given that perspective is so key in systems thinking, the fact that that material has not been used, has not been applied, I think is problematic. And when you talk about examples, well, I have masses now of wonderful examples from my students who are all working, a lot of them in the NHS in the UK, in the health service, in the third sector, dealing with incredible challenges. And they actually came back, and we've had a couple of cohorts who have completed the whole program now. And at the end of the program, they're invited to discuss their journey as a practitioner. And they have learned these different methods. So, and they've learned from Gerald as well, and they've learned VSM, they've learned SSM, they've learned CSH, systems dynamics, the basics of, and the repeating comment that they say is that we came in and we thought we were just going to learn these systems methods, but what they've learned alongside it is massive amount of self-reflection, self-awareness, a deep, deep work on themselves, which has then been translated through the teaching into what this means for practice. And what they come back with is how that has been transformative. And that's their words, not mine. And that in itself changes the way they have conversations, the way they view their own perspective and other people's perspective, the way they see themselves as having multiple perspectives, which obviously systems therapy would speak to as well. And the way they now understand that everyone in the room, as in who they're working with, also has multiple perspectives, which is incredibly contextual and impacted by affect and their own felt sense. So I was actually talking to a student earlier who discussed a number of ways that she worked quite differently with this material to do a systems inquiry, really to inquire into systems and take the complexity of perspective and affect and emotion really seriously and I think Gerald said it, or someone said it earlier, about how you really inquire into a system, because that felt sense, that emotion is indicative of data in the system. It's massively indicative of data in the system, and it's completely ignored, and it's pretty much ignored by any systems method. And I'm happy to have a conversation about that. But I know, like in Checkland's work, he talks about emotion, but it doesn't really pay attention to the embodied nature of affect and emotion. It uses an old version of emotion theory. So it's technically, incorrect.
So both of you are talking the similar language of perspectives, and that's great to hear. And I also heard you saying about this whole idea of multiple perspectives. So how does one build that perspective leadership where we are able to take on multiple perspectives? Because we are so conditioned, each one of us. Would you like to answer that now, or as we get into the next section of which is on the advancements in neuroscience and the imperative of self-knowledge? Would you like to answer that now, either of you?
Well, can I come back? Shakti, you said we are so conditioned, right? So what does that mean? You use the word. So these are words that are out there, aren't they?
Yes.
We are conditioned, and you're taking that from some version of science, psychology, that we are conditioned. Is that what is that? What that, and that you're understanding perspective as conditioned, but what does that mean?
That means that I'm essentially immersed in a narrow view. I'm in a partial view. I don't have a complete view. And that, as Ludwig von Bertalanffy said, I'm going to just read a quote out from him, that science is one perspective that man with his biological, cultural, and linguistic endowment and bondage has created. So we each carrying that legacy with us, right? Our biology, our culture, our our language, where we hail from. So doesn't that contribute to our conditioning? Doesn't that contribute to our partiality?
So we're using words partiality, and we're using his name is quite difficult to say. What's it? Gerald
Bertalanffy.
And when was he about? I don't know. When was Bertalanffy about?
He was working from the 1930s through to the early 70s.
Yeah. So, our understanding of cognitive science and how we actually create meaning in the world would have massively shifted in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And theories of mind that now talk about the mind as much more predictive. So our partiality wouldn't come from kind of, what does partiality mean? I as an individual have an essential self that can only see certain things and not others. I mean, these are all of these things we could discuss in detail, couldn't we? But the predictive mind model, for instance, which holds a lot of currency now and is quite a shift in paradigm, would say that a bit like AI, I guess we are predictive based on prior experience, which makes complete sense. That how can we see anything and make sense of it beyond our own experience of it? And that's a really kind of complex process, which is, as I say again, involves affect. And it also speaks to, and I guess what my students will attest to, if we start to do the work where we really take the time to understand our own perspective and the multiple layers of our multiple perspectives, then we see perspective very differently, and we see the perspective of others differently. And I don't think we describe it as partial. In a way, we might describe it more as fragmented, because it's multiple fragments of perspectives. I mean, even sometimes I'd say to students, whether this is a good example, let's see if it works. Even when we might consider having a piece of cake in the moment, there'll be one fragment of us, one part, and I think the parts works quite well here, that'll say, yes, I should have a piece of cake, I deserve a piece of cake. There'll be another saying, no, I shouldn't have a piece of cake because a piece of cake would be really bad for me right now. Then there'll be a conditional version which just says you can have a piece of cake if you do some exercise later. So you can, and there'll be other, I'll have a piece of cake if someone else has a piece of cake. I mean, and that's just a piece of cake, isn't it? But when we start to talk about complexity, conflict, difference, you can see we can even hold massively contradictory perspectives ourselves, related, to the same kind of topic. And in fact, in the world as it is today, at the same time, human beings love certainty, and we're having to deal with massive amount of uncertainty, and we love certainty. And you can see that out there in the world, can't you? People, as we see the polarization of views in order to find simplicity, but that bit of understanding more of our own complexity and being comfortable with that, and understanding our own diversity of perspective within ourselves, really helps us work as a systems practitioner and then with other perspectives, because we understand that the other people in the room might be saying one thing, but they might also be having multiple other perspectives. So this becomes a big piece of work.
True. Gerald, do you agree with what Rachel has to say? What has been your experience?
Yeah, so I want to build on that. I actually like the word partiality, because I contrast it with comprehensiveness, and we can never be comprehensive. And one of the things I like from what Rachel just said in terms of the multiple perspectives within ourselves is that every time you seek to transcend your own partiality, which is essentially the boundary judgments that you're making about what you're focusing on, what you're not, you're drawing on some other part of yourself that has also been created from past experience. So partiality can allow us to question other partiality. But the really dangerous bit is when systems people believe that you can absolutely transcend boundary judgments, because there's always, whenever you're doing that transcendence, there's always another boundary that is enabling that transcendence. So it's also partial. And of course, you can root back, you can look back in yourself as what has actually created those different partialities that we can draw upon.
So what you're saying is that there is no such thing as absolute transcendence. Yeah, is that what you're saying? There is no absolute transcendence, but don't we tend towards transcendence? Isn't that more in the nature of tending towards transcendence rather than claiming, oh, we've absolutely transcended? How do we move forward? How do we progress and further evolve as human beings? It's
well, I think what progress is a contextual judgment. We can say that we can be more open to different parts of ourselves and learning through dialogue with others. So we can progress in that sense, but I wouldn't have some kind of absolute idea of transcendence. No,
All
that's
right.
my
Okay.
personal belief.
All right. Thank you for that insight and for that clarification. So Rachel, you have been at the MSc program that you have at the University of Birmingham. You have also incorporated several self-reflective practices. And you've also been, a big supporter of, body-based reflections. Can you please throw some light on, what is it that you mean by body-based reflections? How does that enable us to anticipate? How does that enable anticipatory human sense making, and in what way does that actually help us as a practitioner, to better understand and manage systemic challenges?
Yeah, so really speaking from the data that we're gathering again from the students, as you were grounding it in the MSc, we've got nearly 100 students that we are working with. So if we go back, we draw on predictive processing as a foundational theory for the program. So we would say that the traditional systems thinking, material, I guess, mental models, basically most people are grounded in an idea of the mind as a signal response machine, really, stimulus response, if you like. And that things like mindfulness and reflective practice put a pause between stimulus and response. And yeah, as you say, I've done a lot of meditation, and often that's used as a frame for meditation. But actually, with the paradigm shift in predictive processing, and there are increasingly papers in therapy, in meditation, which speak to exactly what I'm saying, it's no longer a situation where we are dealing with a stimulus response process. We're dealing with a prediction process, which is kind of ahead of us. So even the idea of the present moment becomes kind of tricky, as I would say. But this also then goes together with the theory of Feldman Barrett and constructed emotion as being part of our predictive process. So I appreciate there's a lot of theory going on here, which really, and what the students discover is basically really counters what they come with as theories of cognition and emotion. And for a lot of people within the first module or so, that is really, really challenging, because suddenly they're presented with theories of mind and theories of emotion that they haven't even thought about before, because barely anybody actually studies these things in school. And I've asked these questions, this globally, and I find this to be the case. So they're presented with a version of their own sense making, embodied sense making, that they had no idea. And when you actually think about it, it's completely mind blowing, because the mind, it's a control. I mean, it speaks to things that people like Buddha and people would have said about a controlled illusion, but it gives a neurobiological basis for that. And it also kind of gives a neurobiological basis for no self. And I think you've talked about that we're just emerging really in a moment relative to prior experience. Dependent co-arising in Buddhism would also kind of speak to this. So in the program, we start with that theory on the basis that if this is true, then what do we do about this? What do we do about the fact that we are not seeing reality in a way we're generating our reality in the moment? And that is embodied in our felt sense. So it feels right. This feels right. This view feels right. This opinion feels right. Or this feels wrong. It's all embedded and weighted by our felt sense. Well, I think for most of the students over time, it makes complete sense that what we need to do is slow everything down and do a lot more inquiry into what's actually going on, what our experience of our own sense making is. And because I taught yoga and I've done Vipassana yoga and Vipassana meditation, as of you, Shakti, that a lot of body scanning, so many of us have got poor interoceptive capacity. We are not trained to feel unless you've done dancing or some profession where that's been the thing. And academics, of course, will be the worst, because they've completely trained their heads, most of them, and really ignored their bodies. So I do a lot of training on body scanning, yoga
Right.
nidras,
Yes.
a non-sleep deep rest, which is Andrew Huberman's version of yoga nidra. I've done a lot of yoga nidra myself and taught it.
All
And
right.
so we build interoceptive capacity so students can start to relax and feel their affect, the sensations of their body.
Right.
And then we encourage somatic inquiry. And I've developed something called somatic inquiry for systems thinkers,
All right.
which so then, and we do we do somatic inquiry practice. We do one-to-one coaching. We run group reflection practices, groups, sorry. And we also bring in a theory around identity, positionality, and we really get the students to inquire into how their prior experience informs their prior's predictions, felt sense in the moment. So they actually have a very intense kind of reflective thread that moves from theory to personal practice. Obviously, one thing I haven't said, which is really important, working with their attention. So lots of what I would call attention practices,
Right.
because mindfulness comes from Buddhism, and it's not Buddhist in essence. It's about attention and the nature of attention.
Right.
So we use attention practices, interception practices, inquiry, group reflection, and peer reflection, individual and peer reflection practices. And every module they do requires a reflective assignment.
All right, excellent. This seems to be like a really very unique program that you're offering at the University of Birmingham, and that's like really very fascinating and interesting. And thank you for shedding light on this. Before we move on to the next section, Gerald, is there anything that you would like to share with us about the advancements in neuroscience and cognitive psychology that have influenced systems theory, and is that undergoing a big shift itself to theory because of these new advances in mind sciences?
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? That this is, I can look at what the systems community currently is, and interest in this is spread around in a few places, but we are setting out to create some of that change, and we can't control how other people accept it. We can just try to find a way of communicating it that makes it experientially useful for other people. So I think the moment at which I thought, I've got to work with Rachel on this was actually doing the somatic inquiry and feeling the qualitative difference of when I'm paying attention to my own body while I'm observing different understandings emerging. And I mean, I've got quite practiced in doing it now. It's taken a while, but you can begin to make connections between different historical incidents in your own life. I was doing it this morning and seeing how different parts of my experience of racism arose at different points in my childhood, and how I accepted a lot of kind of colonial mythology, and had to challenge it later, and what enabled me to do that. Um, it's fascinating because I could see the different parts in me that both accepted racism and challenged racism. And then it's an emergent process of learning through that. So I think there's a lot to learn from engaging with this, basically.
True, true. I think
And
you did.
oh, one other thing to say about
Yes,
Rachel's
please.
program. It is unique, but in some ways, the uniqueness of it comes out of the tension between the more traditional way of doing systems thinking, which is all around the methodologies, that there's an apprenticeship standard that specifies what has to be taught, and the kind of insights that Rachel brought to this. So it had to teach the methodologies, and it had to transcend those methodologies at the same time. So we actually were able to create emergence out of that tension.
True, which is also what makes your collaboration very unique and very interesting. Because and I love to see your work, flourish and mushroom, and people start incorporating some of the ideas that you have offered to to people like. Thank you for that insight, Gerald and Rachel. I'm going to move to our last section today, which is on the future of systems practice. I'm also mindful that we don't have a lot of time. We could actually spend hours on discussing, and you've done some really amazing work, but I'm going to have to keep this a little concise so that we can then focus on audience questions. So I'm going to start with a very practical question, which has got to do with sustainable development goals. And this was offered in 2015 with so much of fanfare, and yet there is every indication that SDGs. What we use.
Oh, Shakti, you're freezing a bit, I think. It's not just me, is it?
Is it? Am I audible now? Is it any better?
You are audible now. Yeah, it is.
I'm sorry. I'm going to just repeat myself. Yeah. So I was saying that SDGs will launch with a lot of fanfare in 2015, but there is every indication that we will not be able to attain them, by 2030. So what do you see is missing in the SDG narrative today? Either of you or both of you would like to, answer this question.
Shall I pitch in? I mean, just very briefly, they're goals, and that's part of the problem. They're individually specified goals, and underneath there's a whole bunch more goals, so you can't even appreciate them as a whole. And at the end of the day, it requires joined up action across these things. So that's what's missing, how you actually take a systems approach to working with these things, how you account for human perception, given that people, I would say, are partial in that. So they'll have particular foci on their particular concern and may not pay attention to other people's concerns. And then you need processes to work with that. And ultimately, I would like to use the SDGs as categories to identify what's possible to bring in, as opposed to sets of single goals to be achieved. And there's no universal. I've seen a lot of money wasted recently on research to provide some universal answers to how the SDGs relate together. And it's going to be different in each different project. You've got to design something bespoke in each project.
And to your point, Gerald, different societies, different countries are at different stages of evolution. So how can we have a common yardstick for, very diverse countries and communities? Any.
What do you mean by evolution, Shakti?
Gerald, did you get my question?
Well, you did freeze in the middle there, and then Rachel asked another question.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I don't know what the issue with my internet connection is. I was just a counter comment to say that, look, different societies are at different stages of evolution, different communities, different countries. How do we, even if we have to rework the SDGs, today or tomorrow, can we even conceivably think of a common yardstick? How do we tackle the diversity that exists today in our world? From a practice point of view.
Yeah, Shakti, I was asking you what you meant by evolution, different people, different countries.
Yeah, because there's some communities which are relatively speaking at a more tribal stage than than advanced countries are in terms of evolution, in terms of industrialization. There's we are at different stages of evolution, aren't we?
I don't know. Some of
biological
one
evolution.
of our countries that claims to be one of the most advanced and evolved seems to operate in ways that would indicate it's one of the least evolved countries in the world.
Right, right. So what I meant,
I think that's important, isn't it?
yes,
Because
yes,
actually one of the most powerful, at least, one, if not all to some extent, of the most powerful nations seem to work in ways that are completely irrational. I mean, and this is where we come to in terms of, and certainly where my work started, especially
right,
working in the policy kind of world, which is what I did a lot, how are we conceiving of rationality and actually looking across the waters from the UK, versions of how we're understanding rationality and how humans make sense of the world, how truth is created, how reality is created, become a big issues in terms of climate change, because we've understood the facts for 40, 50, 60 years. So there's something else going on here. I think human perception is key. How we make sense of the world, and the fact that we're ignoring that is really impactful. And of course, we should mention the inner development goals, which have been around for quite a while. And the fact that they're not kind of forefronted probably speaks to how we view inner work, and that because inner work developed in the therapeutic world, it's stigmatized, and this is massively problematic. So this is a kind of is a complex problem.
In your view, Rachel, can we integrate inner development goals with a future version of sustainable development goals? Do you think that can be done at that level and at that scale?
I don't know. I mean, all these things happen in their own little silos, and I did engage with the inner development goals a while ago, but I actually found some of it, they were not, there was, so, and this is probably controversial, but basically because that area, that world is basically a mixture of inner work is therapeutic work. It draws on what people call spiritual work, religious work. It's a very complex area, and the science around neurobiology of sense making is so recent, and actually advances and challenges and validates some or all of what I've just described. Some therapy, some spiritual, and yet people, and we're taking a long time to evolve that massively, to actually do that piece of evolution. So what I noticed within the inner development goals is they're still carrying what I would challenge as old versions of how we might see our inner world and how we make sense, which in it, and they become a slightly I don't know the words, I want to kind of say, people hold particular views about our sense making, and there's just not enough work in the area, I don't think, then to bring this forward. But yeah, it's a long conversation, Shakti, and I noticed someone said on the questions, so moving to the questions a little bit, how does emotional intelligence fit into your approach? And that would be an exact example. Emotional intelligence was developed by Daniel Goleman mainly on and now what is very much an outdated view of emotions. There's a lot of talk about regulating emotions and managing emotions, which is often used as a kind form of suppressing emotions. Now I think there's a lot of that that's a misunderstanding of emotion, because actually emotion is really important data in the system. And so I would emotional intelligence is something has become one of those phrases that makes me tense quite a lot, because I think it's representative of a very a not so useful version of how we understand and work with emotions. Yeah.
All right, thank you. It's interesting. Yes, of course, please, Gerald.
I'll just hop in very quickly, because I think Rachel said something important about, there's some traditions that are therapeutic, there are some traditions that are spiritual, and I think it's really quite important to ground this the way Rachel is doing in the science, because when some people hear therapy, they think, well, I'm not broken, I don't need that. So it's a, they're dismissive because of that. When some people hear spiritual, they say, well, I'm not religious, so it's not relevant to me. We need to find a language that actually doesn't fall into those two traps. We can learn from those traditions, but I think this language opens up to more people. And there's just one thing I wanted to just go back to, that business of evolution, because I grew up, I found myself kind of in the Christian church, going to church 3 times a week when I was a small child. And I grew up with the notion that missionaries go out to civilize people. And that's a kind of colonial process that has one view of what evolution is. And it's really dangerous. So I think that's really important that we keep an open mind to what different possibilities for evolution could be.
All right, thank you. I was actually, when I was first speaking about evolution, I was looking at it in the context of another theory of spiral dynamics, but we don't have the time to get into that. It was not the evolution of the species, but it was in a different context. Yeah, but I want, if you could, both of you could, in just a minute each, because we are lagging behind, and we've got a whole lot of questions. I think almost 17 questions that have come in. So in 1 minute, if you could sum up each, both of you, what do you see as the future of practice?
Hold on, where are the questions?
It's in the Q&A box. Do you see the Q&A box on your screen?
No. I can see chat and I can see.
Do you see 3 dots?
You might have to click on more, Gerald.
Got it. I've got it. Yeah, got it.
There's 17 questions that have come in. But just quickly, in just a minute each, can you tell me what you both see as the future of systems practice?
I can tell you things I like.
You can say whatever comes.
Whatever you like. Yeah. Well, I think this work is the future of systems practice. I very much hope the somatic work and forms part of systems practice. I really enjoy the work of the Systems Design Association, and there I think I might even seen Andreas on the participant list. I love their work and the way it brings together the methodologies very flexibly, design work very flexibly, and a real appreciation of the inner work. So that's the conference I have come to enjoy most. And I also see Abby's on the line, and with her work with meaning making and communication. And I love her work and her podcast. Abby, you need to write in the chat the name of the podcast. I'm getting a little bit tired now and I can't remember, but her work brings together some really, really useful stuff. So I think Joe and I are hoping to go to that conference again in Turin. So that's one of the most exciting places I enjoy being in terms of the systems thinking and how that's developing.
Thank you, Rachel. Gerald, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Okay, so I think a lot of my generation and older systems practitioners are kind of in a mode where they're either working in consultancy mode or they're working, they do a lot of workshops, and we have to transcend that for sure, because workplaces these days have far higher work intensity. People are distributed online most of the time. Actually getting people together for workshops and formal projects is very limiting for systems practice. So we need to really be thinking about systems thinking skills that people can use at any moment, when they're just having a moment of reflection, when they're just in a conversation in the corridor. It needs to be a set of simple skills that can be used at any time. And so I like to think about boundaries, for example. Boundary questions can be really quite revolutionary. And I'm thinking in terms of 3 levels of systems work. So the fundamental idea is that you see ourselves as emergent from systems. So there's the systems idea itself. Then you have the idea of how we can change systems by rethinking things, rethinking boundaries, rethinking different perspectives, rethinking relationships, seeing different opportunities for emergence. And then you have the methodologies which actually codify some of those systems thinking skills for different purposes. Bearing in mind that when you're developing a project, you very rarely draw. I think I can only name one time that I've used one methodology whole as its creators originally intended. You have to design something that's fit for practice.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so thank you, Gerald and Rachel, for those insights. And yes, we look forward to further advancements in systems thinking and systems practice. And thank you for sharing your thoughts. You've really been pretty much at the frontier of a lot of things. I want to make sure that we have some time for audience questions. So I'm going to pick a few. In the interest of time, I'm going to start with the question that Marissa Levine has posed. And she says, it's for both of you or either of you. How do you deal with those aspects of living systems that are unmeasurable? Gerald or Rachel, would you like to step in?
I can hop in. So
Please.
in terms of evaluation, one of the real dangers in evaluation is only looking at what's measurable. In terms of, if you mean by measurable something that is quantifiable, because then you only see those things and that distorts the system. And I'm just remembering when my partner Wendy went into hospital, and she had to have an endoscopy, which is tube down the throat, and they did this without an anaesthetic, and she couldn't let them do it because it was so painful. And then they got really indignant and saying, we're the best department in the country. And she asked, well, how do you measure best? And he said, we get people through in 20 minutes. Most people take an hour and a half to go through. And that's because they can measure how long it takes to go through, and they can reduce the time by not giving people anesthetics. So people pay in pain and discomfort for doing what's measurable. So that's a real danger. And very often it's about appreciating different perspectives that you see in different perspectives, what people are seeing as not measurable.
I'll also chip in with a couple of call outs. I think Ellen's, which is maybe still on the line, and that if we're talking around evaluation, the GEMS work that Ellen Lewis has developed with the name escapes me, Gerald. Who's Ellen developed that with? Ellen can write it. That looks at gender environment.
Anne Stevens.
Anne Stevens, that's
Anne
it.
Stevens and Reddy. I can't remember her first name. But
yeah.
Shivangi Reddy. Yeah.
So they're a really good, and also we work with Andrew Harrison's work on a reevaluation. He's got this 9-box framework, and we work with the students about considering what we're valuing, what is value before then, and designing the kind of evaluation process partly around that. So I think it's looking at frameworks, ideas that are attempting to, there's so much out there in terms of evaluation, I think, to draw on, and people who know a lot more about it than I do, for sure.
All right, thank you. The next question is from Vishwa Shah, and he asks, what is your own experience of working with mental models?
I think sorry, I've lost you. I've got to say the chat is so wonderful. What's going on in the chat is so wonderful.
Yes.
Everybody's enjoying
I haven't
that.
had a chance to look at the chat. So
I'm telling you, Shakti, it's really,
I'm only looking at the Q&A.
So there's really great chat going on, and I really encourage that to carry on in the background, putting stuff in, because there's obviously so much wisdom in the whole group. I think I spoke to mental models in the sense that it's what are we saying when we're saying mental models is an outdated understanding of the mind and it needs updating? And all my work, in a way, talks to an advancement based on more recent science of how we might work with our sense making, basically. And I'm sure there's other people doing similar work, and what we need is more people attempting to do work to advance that area, because it's so very obviously underdeveloped. And even if you attempt to look for papers on mental models, you'll find very, very little. And even, Peter Sengi's work is pretty old now. So yeah, my that's all of my work. I've got a paper coming out that speaks more to how we've worked with this, hopefully in the near future. And I am now going to experiment with running a retreat that brings together systems thinking with this different kind of understanding of mind in a retreat center to kind of build this into more sustained practice.
All right. So John Evans has passed a comment. It's a comment plus a question. Does anyone have a link to Ben Taylor's blog on problems with mental models? So you've expressed that you have a problem with mental model, and you've also said it's outdated. But can you tell us more? Why do you feel that it's outdated? And is this of any relevance to our audience? Ben Taylor's blog on problems with mental models? Is that something
Benjamin. It's Benjamin, isn't it? It's Benjamin Taylor's blog.
Benjamin Taylor. Yes, of course.
So
yes.
he is. Yes. So if you go onto LinkedIn.
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn with him. I know him as Benjamin and not as Ben.
Sorry, I said Ben, didn't I? I'm getting a little bit tired. So Benjamin Taylor, and he started a blog on the limitations of mental models that kind of evolved, and it's got a whole debate around this, mental models and the limitations of the idea of mental models. So I think that would be the best place for people to go.
All right, I will try and search for it, and I maybe reach out to Ben himself and see if he can give us a link to his blog. Yes. Then there's a question from Felicia, and she says, Felicia says, sorry.
Just before you, I wanted to say something else about mental models
please.
that I don't know if anybody has said.
Yes.
They're not just mental, apart from anything else. If you've ever worked in an organization where there are undiscussables, you might be able to think about it, but you can't necessarily say it. So they're social as well as mental. And the word mental in that context actually limits your understanding of where it's coming from.
Right. Correct. I get what you're saying. Yeah. So what you're saying, I mean, it's a misnomer, right? The term itself, mental model, could be a misnomer. All right. Felicia asks a comment, taking a page from Donella Meadows and how she uses the term purpose. As long as the purpose of the dominant social system is continued growth of the global market economy, isn't all we are discussing just going to continue to exist in its own pocket universe? So her question really is on purpose. Where does purpose fit into your work?
Was it on GDP? Was it on growth? Was it a question about growth?
I'll just repeat it. It's a comment, a question. Felicia is citing Donella Meadows' work and how Donella uses the term purpose. And then, as long as the purpose of the dominant social system is continued growth of the global market economy, isn't all we are discussing just going to continue to exist in its own pocket universe? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, there's so many different views of this, isn't it? I mean, yes, in a way, we know that the growth economy as it exists is just going to lead to, as it is leading to climate collapse, and that is getting increasingly worrying. And we've got this, what is it, the Atlantic Movement of Currents, is it the AMOC now, that's looking at, it's more like 50% likely to flip, which would actually mean the UK, would go into freezing states, -19, and that's 50-50 now. Are we 10 years ahead of reaching the 1.5 degree target? So we are in, a climate emergency. That is the situation, isn't it? And that's why we need to optimize what we're doing as quickly as possible. A lot of people argue we've gone way beyond. Yeah, so we really need to have the kind of dialogue where we are, really, really creating change quickly. We are tragically in a very impossible situation.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, go ahead, Gerald.
Well, I just wanted to say it's one of the reasons that I made a decision a few years ago to really concentrate my practice time on environmental issues and working with organizations that can make a difference. And, we can say there's limits to what we can do, but one of the things that we can do is make systems thinking a little more transparent and easy for people to adopt, so that we have a chance of turning it around. And we can't know the future of the system as a whole, but it's my reason for being, basically, not my reason for being, but my reason for working in this space ultimately is to make that sort of change, and recognizing those things is really essential. It's the reason why I don't just work on, for example, organizational consultancies, but try to work on issues across organizations and communities.
Thank you, Gerald.
Actually, I don't know what time there's actually a few questions in the chat rather than in the Q&A, and just one thing I'd like to speak to. There's a couple of people who've said Lisa Feldman Barrett. Someone said, "Oh, we haven't covered the neuroscience," and I would point them, as have another couple of people in the chat, to Lisa Feldman Barrett's work. But in terms of the predictive mind work, I would also point people to I should probably put it in here, Andy Clark's work, and
The Experience Machine.
Seth and Carl Friston, who was the founder, all relevant to predictive processing. Andy Clark's book is called The Experience Machine.
And I found that's the best one in terms of covering the breadth of those things.
Oh, has that gone to everybody? No, is that just gone to host and panelists? I can't quite see. Has everyone seen that? Can anyone see that? I'm a bit concerned I haven't sent that to everyone. Oh, hang on. Ah, I see. Nope. Okay, I can see it now. Thank you. Copy, paste. There. Thank you, Vishpa. So that's a little bit more on neuro. So we have talked a little bit about the neuroscience there, but we obviously haven't had time to go into massive amounts of detail. There's a bit of talk, I think, about various practices linked to Vipassana, Buddhism, yoga. I probably haven't got a lot of time to go into those, though. That's almost a whole other discussion. Are we nearly at time, Shakti?
Yes, we are at time, but do you have room for one or two more questions? I know we have a flood of questions, but there's just so many. So if it's okay with you, can we continue for another 5 minutes?
We can. Obviously, people might need to leave to get to other things.
Is there any question that you would like to pick from the Q&A box? Maybe why don't both of you pick one question each from the Q&A box? And
yeah, I'd like to.
That.
Sorry, yeah. I'd like to address that one. What is the relationship to knowing that we're navigating? And I'd
Can you
like
please
to
read
address
out the
that
name
in
of the questioner? Is that
it's Vish. I can't read the name. I'm sorry.
Vishwa? Is it
It's
Vishwa Shah?
too small. Yes.
Vishwa
Yes.
Shah? Okay. All right. So would you please,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
So what is the relationship to knowing that we're navigating? But I just wanted to give a really particular answer. It's not a general answer, and it's the notions of three levels of learning that is a summary of a bunch of different theories of learning that Roger Packham and Richard Borden produced. And they said, really, there's three levels of learning. The level one is when we just do problem solving without changing our fundamental assumptions. Level two is when we do challenge our fundamental assumptions and we get to more systemic change in our perspectives. But level three is when we change our understanding of knowing itself, when we begin to see ourselves more as relational, more in terms of being emergent, and what we can do in terms of thinking to our thinking and practice to change systems. And it's that level three learning that is the most fundamental. For example, to Rachel's program, to the program I've been part of in the past at Hull as well. That level three learning changes your understanding of your own agency in the world to be a more systemic one, and that will help you then in all the other types of learning.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, Vishwa, I hope that has answered your question. So, Rachel, would you like to pick a question from the Q&A box? One final question.
Well, Louis just put something in the question and answer box, which I'm really sorry if that's how it sounds, Louis, but I really don't think that is actually what it is. And I don't think that's how my students would experiencing it. She says it sounds as if the speakers stitched together established seemingly partial practices, e.g. focusing on body-mind effect. I'm afraid it's a much more integrated, it is exactly as you describe at the end. It's an integrating sense-making praxis that can be applied in the midst of living our daily lives. And my students would very, very much attest to that. That is exactly what they report. And I think Gerald hopefully would support that as well and has heard the students speak to that. I think it's impossible in this kind of environment to really explain it properly in detail. I think this, I think that's right. It's a massive challenge to talk about it in this way, because it's a kind of methodology. And I know, Louis, you've got your own well-developed kind of approach, and constellation work is massively useful in this space. And what we really need is exactly that, the actual space where we can develop this work more coherently and make it more visible. And I think actually a lot of the comments that are here really speak to that. And we're in a world where it's actually very hard to get that funded. So if anybody, has access to funding that allows us to develop this work, then do get in touch, because the academic world is so pressed at the moment as well. Practitioners are so pressed. So yeah, that's exactly what we need to be funded and supported as part of all the good work that's going on in the systems world. So that's great.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Gerald, there is somebody who's asked a question, and if you are able to, you could put it in the chat, who the thinkers for the reference regarding the three levels of learning that you just spoke of. If you're able to mention the names, if you can put it in the chat, please. Angus
Yes.
has asked that question, so that would be very helpful.
It's Richard Borden and Roger Packham, but that's and they were surveying about 3 or 4 different theories of learning. And one of the major theories that they drew upon was Gregory Bateson. And that's a really important one. So I'll just put the names.
Would you please put it on the chat? Yes. So
yeah, I have. But it's 1991, so it's a little while ago. But that's an academic paper. But if you want to read a book, I would recommend Bateson's Steps to an Ecology of Mind, which also has similar ideas about learning in it.
All right.
But it's
Excellent.
epistemic learning they talk about as the third layer.
Yeah, all right. Okay, so I think we are at the end of our webinar today, and what is very clear, what's emerging from this discussion is that look, there is it's a great initiative that the two of you thought, and I'm sure there are others too, but the very fact that you brought these disciplines together. It's from my own experience, I have found, both as a systems thinking practitioner, as well as a Vipassana meditator and someone who's been involved in a fair amount of self-reflective practices, to be able to bring the two together, that synthesis is extraordinary. And I know that it's based on the kind of questions that we got, that synthesis a great start. And, even we were not able to get into the details of the advancements in neuroscience and cognitive psychology today. But what is very clear is that they are gravitating towards each other, and that the full implications of this integration will unfold, as we go along in the future. Yeah, so it's a very promising future. Everything is not perfect. There's still more to be discovered and ironed out. But I want to thank you both, Rachel and Gerald, for taking out the time today, for being here on this webinar, for sharing your views very candidly, and for all the great work that that you've done. And so thank you once again. Yeah, very much appreciate all the work. Yeah, as a token of appreciation, what Shaktify is doing is it is gifting you 12 saplings each, a dozen saplings that Shaktify is going to plant in your name in the state of Uttarakhand in India. It's a project to save the Himalayas, the Himalaya ecosystem, and that's a small token of appreciation from Shaktify. Yeah, thank you very much for your presence. Yeah, and have a good rest of the evening back in the UK. Yeah, thank you to our audience, for all of you from whichever part of the world you have been. And I hope you have a good night or a good afternoon, a good morning to all of you. Thank you, and bye for now. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.